the Pediatric Lounge, a podcast taking you behind the door of the physician's lounge to get a deeper insight into just what docs are talking about today. From the clinically profound to the wonderfully routine and everything in between. Haven't seen, oh, there we go. Good morning, George. It's great to see you one more time.
How you doing, Dr. Bravissimo? Today we have a great guest, Andrew Paulson, and his topic today is going to be the state of student loan forgiveness and the future of doctoring. He's coming to us from the studentloanadvice.com organization. He has a master's degree in accounting and is a certified student loan professional, enjoys business and finance. And he developed this very interesting organization called studentloanadvice.com. Let's take it away.
Welcome, Andrew.
Thanks for having me on.
Why do you think the student loan debt is so high in the United States? And why is there a crisis in this country with medical school?
Yeah, it's a fabulous question. If you go back 10 or so years ago, we were not at 1.7 trillion. We were at like 500 billion. So the number has just absolutely skyrocketed. And I think student loan debt is only second to mortgage debt right now in the US. So it has become a huge factor in many people's lives. I know like the average number is 40,000 or 35,000, I think, for borrowers that have student loans, and many doctors that around the country are coming out of medical school with $250,000 plus. And the one side of this is that the balances have gotten larger. And I think in large part, it's because there is no cap on how much you can borrow at graduate school. The school can charge you $100,000 a year, for maybe it's $70,000 for tuition, and then it's $30,000 for your books and living and all that, those sorts of things. And so that's one of the big things that we've seen change as working with borrowers that graduated in the late 90s, early 2000s, is that they were coming out with 75 grand, maybe 100,000 tops, right? And that's one of the huge things, is just that the amount of money that you can borrow, there's no cap on that. And on top of that, they are not borrowing at 2% interest rates. They're not borrowing at 1% interest rates. The doctors that are borrowing today that are in school right now, it is 7.5% and 8.5% interest rates that they are borrowing. If you think about a 4-year program for many in graduate school or medical school, and you borrow $250, but when you borrow $250, you don't end up with you don't come out of school with $250. Those loans start to grow while you're in school and while you're a student. And so if you borrow $250, you come out with $3. And then, you're faced with this, really ups. Not only are these balances have gotten significantly, they've gotten very large just because of the overall cost of doing business or getting into medicine. But it's also the fact that these rates, they're not 2%. They're not 1%. And we're in a situation right now where interest rates have gone up pretty significantly. And it just so happens that the student loan interest rates that you have to borrow when you're going through school, if you don't have a big chunk of money, they're tied into what the Federal Reserve is setting.
But those interest rates, they get modified with what the prime rate is.
Exactly. So every single year, they reset the interest rates and how they do things, like this Treasury auction in May. But as interest rates have gone up 4% or so, I think in the last year and a half, where you could take a student loan that was 7% and you could go from 7 down to 2. And I think those two pieces, that the cost has gone up. And on top of that, then the amount that is growing on an annual basis has become a really daunting thing. And that's where you hear those stories where such and such borrower they borrowed 200 grand and they've been paying their loans for 10 years and they still owe $300,000, right?
And what kind of stories or challenges do you hear from these physicians as they're trying to manage their student loan debt? They're coming out of medical school, they're going into residency, they don't make a whole lot of money. And then they're out, they're attendings like Dr. Bravo. What do you hear about their stories? What do they tell you?
I think medicine is so unique because you don't go from medical school and then you're making the money that your first year out. You got residency. You're going to be trained. You don't go from making no money 250, 300, whatever it is, right?
Right.
And you have this unique period of time where you're just scrapping by, right? You're cutting your teeth. You're taking step 3. You're doing all these sorts of things to become a physician. And guess what's happening? Those loans are still there. You can't start making a $5,000 monthly payment on these student loans when that's probably what your take-home pay is, or maybe it's darn near more than
It's hard for them to pay it off. That's why they always say when you become an attending for the first couple of years, in order to pay for your student loan, you should continue to live like a resident. Don't buy a fancy car, a fancy house that you can't pay, and so forth and so on, expensive vacations. Any thoughts, Dr. Bravo?
So, Andrew, I'm going to level set and ask you a few questions because the medical industry in the U.S. is quite complex. If this hasn't changed, every medical school in the U.S. gets about $40,000 per student from Medicare to augment the education. And every residency spot used to get $80,000 a year from Medicare. I don't know if that's changed or not, but that's how they used to incentivize medical schools and residency programs at hospitals to teach young doctors. Right now, the average student debt burden for a medical student graduating from a U.S. medical school is around $300,000. And the starting salary for a pediatrician in Wisconsin is $120,000. In Michigan is about $140,000. In Northern Virginia is $160,000. Across the country is about $160,000. And the problem that I see is the same out of control games being played in education K through 12, in colleges, hospital administrators, where the prices continue to go up and administrators keep being hired to make more money. And there is pervasive government incentives to spend more at the cost of the consumer. And so this is a structural problem that can only be addressed if we begin by holding, for example, Harvard. I like to pick on Harvard because I'm never smart enough to go to Harvard. But they admit 1,000 kids a year, and they have a hedge fund of $50 billion. And they don't use any of their endowment to create like the Catholic school. I was Catholic, so I like what the Catholic Church did, right? They created all these little schools throughout the world in impoverished communities, and they taught children how to read and write. If Harvard really cares about diversity, equity, inclusion, all the other things that they say they care, why are they not incentivizing primary care physicians in their medical school to go there for free? Why are they not opening small schools in underserved communities to give these children a leg up? They have $50 billion. That's a lot of money. Even if they spend $2.5 billion a year, which is 5%, which is way below their return, they would not run out of the money. So this is a structural problem. And as a finance guy, you probably can explain to the audience how it is just not possible to service $300,000 in debt and live when your starting salary is $120,000. And it's probably not going to go up more than to $180,000.
It's a fabulous question, and it's something that I deal with every day. And I think before we get into how does a pediatrician, how do you reconcile with that? I think it's first that something that I didn't touch on earlier is that as the cost of education has gone up and it's skyrocketed, income has not been commensurate with that.
Right.
And that's one of the biggest problems, because the pediatricians from 15 years ago, maybe income's not too dissimilar from what it is today. But the cost of going to school now, it's not $100,000 anymore. It's $300,000. It's triple, 2.5 times what it was 20 years ago. And you're not making, they weren't I don't know exactly what the income was, but maybe it was $100,000 and they're not making $350,000, right? So that's where this, not to mention, I think the cost of housing and those sorts of things. But what happens, I think, when they're strapped with $300,000, when if it's at 7%, it's growing, the loan's growing $2,000 a month. So if you just want to break even on this loan, you got to pay $2,000 to keep that balance from growing. And so then, you're really faced with, do you do what you were talking about, Dr. Roby, where you live like a resident for 5 or 10 years. And this isn't a thing where you can live like a resident for 2 years. If your loans are double what you owe, that's going to be a longer period of time. And maybe that's going to push off some of those life goals. Maybe it's starting a practice, or it's starting a family, or I don't know what it is. But buying a house, all these sorts of different financial goals that people have going through school and working so hard to get to this point. But that's where I think we're really looking at kind of the tool chest of repayment options becomes vital.
So I guess you can tell us, with the physicians coming out, what are these people supposed to do? What forgiveness programs are out there for doctors other than going to some mountaintop to work? Especially when they specialize in pediatrics.
Yeah.
That's what I knew student loan forgiveness was. You go to the Appalachian Mountains, you stay there for a couple of years, or you go into the middle of the country somewhere where the pediatrician is the internist and is the veterinarian at the same time, and then they leave.
Yeah.
It's not like that. They're doing other things. What can they do?
That's a good point. I think the geographic arbitrage one as well, where you're living in a very rural area that just has an extremely hard time staffing physicians, right? It's going to be different than in LA or in New York City. They're going to pay you more there, even though it's a lot lower cost of living. I think that's one thing to take into account. But there are a number of other repayment programs that particularly, one of them in particular is called the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. And I see lots and lots of pediatricians that will do this because you borrow $300,000 for medical school. You would think you're probably going to pay $350,000, $400,000 in total over however long it takes shop. Maybe it's 10 years, maybe it's 15 years. But you can get into a repayment program. The way this Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program works is you have to work in a nonprofit or in a 501c3 for a decade. For those, if you go to residency and you just do 3 years of training, you got 3 of the 10 years done most likely because you're probably working community hospital or an academic center, right? And then you would have to stay in an academic hospital, a nonprofit, or something along those lines for about 7 years. Okay. And you make payments that are based on your income. And if your income is $10,000 a month, then your payments would be roughly $1,000. So then over 10 years, over a year, that's about $12,000 that you pay. And over a 10-year period of time, you just paid $120,000 roughly to that balance of $300,000. Go ahead, Herb.
I'm going to interrupt you for a second. When you say those first 3 years of residency counts, that counts if you don't put your loans on hold, right? Because you can't put your loans on hold while you're a resident, which seems like from a financial strategy right now, that would be a ill-advised move.
Exactly. And so when somebody is trying to maybe before we get into the forgiveness options, what do you have in terms of repayment options? How do you start paying on a loan that's $300,000, that's growing at 7%, that's growing $2,000 a month? So for private loans, there's not a whole lot of wiggle room, but I think for most of you have federal loans. And so we'll talk to that. There's really 2 buckets of payments. There's the amortized options where think of it like a 10-year mortgage or think of it like a 30-year mortgage, and payments are generally fixed. They do have some payments that are called graduated where it starts out a little bit cheaper and then it goes up over time. But generally there's the 10-year standard plan and there's the 25-year extended repayment program. Okay. That's fixed monthly payment options generally. You also have what are called income-driven repayment. These are if you're in residency right now and you're feeling overwhelmed and you just feel like you can't make these payments, you should definitely look into income-driven repayment. Because if you're making $60,000 as a resident and your take-home pay is $4,000 a month, they take about 10% of that when they're calculating your payment in an income-driven plan. So hypothetically, it's usually $300, $300, maybe $400 per month is what it would be as a resident, which is a whole lot different than having to pay $2,000, $2,500, $3,000 per month. So that is a good option when you're in residency. And then even if you're interested in a forgiveness track, these income-driven plans will help you progress towards like the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program that I talked about. Whereas entering forbearance or deferment, something to that effect where you're not doing any payments is usually one of the worst things that you can do because the loans are going to continue to grow. And then on top of that, if you did end up trying to, consider one of the forgiveness tracks, you're not accumulating any credit. So I think one of the big things is to get educated on those income driven plans and just get your arms around those options. But think about it. It's about 10% of whatever your take home pay is. And then that's where, along the lines of different forgiveness tracks or repayment assistance programs, you got PSLF. That's the holy grail of forgiveness where you can pay about not even $100,000. If we're thinking about 3 years of lower payments, maybe you're paying $70,000, $80,000 to that $300,000 and then it can go away. And whatever
that goes away after 10 years, right?
It does.
So explain that to me. So you work at a non-profit for a full 10 years, you continue to pay your loan up until 10 years, and whatever's left over, that's what's forgiven.
That principal and that interest. So if you borrowed 300, right, and over the 10 years, you made barely enough payments to just break even. You won't even make enough payments to break even on that interest. If you're paying $1,000 a month and it's growing $2,000 a month, you think it would be growing. And maybe we'll get into this a little bit where there are some repayment programs that actually help to subsidize the interest so that your balance would actually never grow, which this is some recent stuff that's happened with income driven repayment programs. But with public service loan forgiveness, like I said, it's for most pediatricians, it's 3 years in residency, and then it's 7 years working at a nonprofit hospital, whether it's an academic center, community hospital, something to that effect, federally qualified health center, I don't know, something along those lines. And then at the 10 years, you would then apply for forgiveness and whatever that balance is. Let's say it's 300 still. That go away tax-free. So there's no taxes, there's no extra balance out on that. The entire cost for you, a doctor, is really just whatever those monthly payments were based on your income.
Now, I heard that this PSLF program is like something there, but nobody ever qualifies for it. But I think there were some recent changes or some developments in policies that changed this a little bit.
Yeah. And I'm skeptical of these different sorts of programs where I want to see somebody get there and see them have their loans. I've had personally over 100 doctors that I've worked with that have received it. And as of middle of July, roughly, there's been over 660,000 borrowers that have received PSLF and that have had their loans discharged. But now, if you go back 3 years ago, not too long ago, there's only like 20,000 people that have received this. Because the program that was created in 2007, really the first borrowers that had hit 10 years of employment were 2017. And so we saw a very slow uptick of success. And it's just because there were a lot of bugs in the system. There's this certification that you have to do with each of your employers to verify that you've been working at a qualifying job and you've been working the requisite hours that you need. And so it took a little bit of time to do that. But then there's been some changes around the edges recently that have made it maybe it's more inclusive or easier, however you want to say it. But we've also seen that it's been working. And it's one of those things where you don't want to hitch your wagon to public service loan forgiveness and 100% put all your money in on it. But it is very real. And I've had clients $400,000, $500,000 loans that have had them discharged through public service loan forgiveness. So
Andrew,
go ahead, Herb.
I have a couple of questions. So just on the back of the envelope, if you owe $300,000 today, what would be your payment to pay that over 10 years, your monthly payment with that 7% interest rate?
Yeah, if you owe $300,000 at roughly 7%, that's a monthly payment of that's $3,500.
And that's before you pay taxes. So
that's before you pay taxes. This is all dollars. Exactly.
$7,000 to pay that $500. So just to stay afloat, your base salary has to be at least $100,000 just to stay afloat before you eat.
The amount of student loan debt that these students are having, it's making decisions in what part of medicine these people will practice. It has to affect what kind of physicians are you talking to? Are you talking to pathologists, internists, pediatricians, surgeons, radiologists? I think people are choosing different specialties because of their loan.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I meet with people who are making $50,000 as a physician. And sometimes I meet with some people that are making seven figures. And I'm like, you probably don't need help if you're making seven figures, you know, but it's all across the board. And it's interesting where you can be making $900,000 as an orthopedic surgeon, and you could also be making $125,000 in some field in pediatrics, right? And the program is the same. And so maybe there would be an incentive for them to buoy this up, perhaps more for those that are in primary care. But as the rules are, it's if you work at a nonprofit or 501c3, you work 30 hours per week on average, and you have the right kind of loans, these direct federal student loans. That's what everybody's getting these days. And you're in a qualifying repayment program, you can definitely apply. And I think going back to that point that you were talking about, Herb, is how does somebody, if you have a $300,000 loan and you're paying $3,500 a month, that's just over a 10-year period of time. So what if we take that and we're looking at it from the PSLF standpoint, and instead of having to pay $3,500 a month, you're paying $1,000 a month. And frankly, actually, those first 3 years as a resident, you're only paying $300 a month. What that does is it vastly changes the cost of the loan, and can be a big game changer, and then it maybe it puts them in a position where they don't have to put off saving for retirement. They don't have to put off those different financial goals, because it's a whole lot harder to come up with $7,000 gross income that you know was going to go.
But all of these programs that I see, they seem to be geared towards big institutions and networks. Why is it so difficult for a physician to join a private practice organization and qualify for loan forgiveness? I think nobody cares. But why is that?
This is a great question, because sometimes I'm working with these doctors in private practice, and they're working with the patient population that's underserved.
So it's convenient. So let's get into that. You have the HPSA scores, the MUA, medically underserved area, which you have to have a score. Long Island is certainly not a medically underserved area. It has no HPSA. But there's plenty of MUP, the meaningful use populations. Yet private practices, especially pediatric offices, have a lot of Medicaid and Child Health Plus. But they talk about MUP, medically underserved populations, but they just revert back to the HPSA score and MUAs. And then nobody knows about this. Why is that?
This is where maybe there could be some more nuance to these rules, because I think it does skew to large healthcare systems, to large academic institutions, large non-profit hospitals, perhaps, where at times in those medically underserved practices that might be private, they're serving the right kind of the population that this whole program, because this program is to encourage borrowers, to encourage doctors and dentists and nurses and providers to go into careers in public service. And I think that's very much, it fits the bill. But at the end of the day, the way this program works is that you have to be getting paid directly by that nonprofit or that such and such 501c3 hospital in this case, or nonprofit clinic. But there are some little recent rule changes where if you're in California or if you're in Texas, there's these state laws that have set up really guardrails where unless you're working at the Veteran Affairs Hospital, an academic center, or an FQHC, you can't be directly employed by a hospital. So they found a way to backdoor into this and now can qualify. But for the other 48 states, I don't think they have quite as those types of laws. But yes, at the end of the day, it's if you're getting your paycheck by a private enterprise, even though you've got privileges at such and such nonprofit hospital, or you're working with an underserved community, it's still, unfortunately, right now, doesn't check the box there.
We'll get back to that because I have a couple of questions for you since you're an accountant. Some health systems are now giving physicians in primary care a $100,000 sign-on bonus. There's such a shortage so that they can repay some of these student loans right off the bat. Is that $100,000 loan repayment counted as income for the physician?
I think it depends on how the employer divvies it out, because sometimes what they do, Herb, is they will give you money up front. And that is, so that 100,000 is really right? When you think about it. The other way that I see some employers approach this is the physician makes payments over the course of a year, $2,000 per month, let's say. So they pay 24 grand on their loans, and then their employer will reimburse them for that. And then when you take more on a reimbursement, when you take on more of a reimbursement standpoint, usually they're able to get rid of the tax side of things. So that's the way I see it. Sometimes they give you a lump sum money. Sometimes they will just pay your servicer outright on your behalf, or they will reimburse you and for whatever payments you've made.
Then on this public service, I have a couple of thoughts. So one, could this just be done away with? Somebody, like, I start doing this, I'm into my fifth year, and the Congress changes and they say, we're not going to fund this anymore, and it's gone.
Yeah. So the way that things usually work for student loan history is that, do I think PSLF is going to change? Yes. Do I think it's going to come with caps, perhaps, on how much, whatever balance you can have forgiven? Probably. Is it going to come with income thresholds, or maybe you make above 200 grand and maybe it starts phasing out? I think something like that is on the table and could happen. But this is going to impact new borrowers. This is going to impact those that have yet to go to school, or that are perhaps borrowing now. When they have taken on changes in the past, what they've done is they've really taken a phasing out approach. So those that are already enrolled in an income-driven plan or in the public service loan forgiveness program, that would be around until you would hit your forgiveness milestone.
And then I think it's a temporary law, right? But there's been a addition to retirement plans, to 401k plans, where the employer is allowed to match the employee's loan repayment as opposed to their contribution to their 401k. So if I'm paying $2,500 towards loan repayments, and I was working for RBK Pediatrics, but put in those $2,500 a month into my 401k as a matching contribution up to whatever the limits are. I think that's set to expire in 3 years or so. Is that something that helps some? I know it's a small amount, but it's a nice idea of letting people pay off their loans and at the same time still having some savings for retirement.
Yeah, I think that if you're not doing some of the forgiveness stuff that we've been talking about, absolutely. If your employer is going to help you with some type of loan repayment assistance, where they'll match the $2,500 that you pay, I'd say 100%. And it because it's really at the end of the day, it's building your net worth, right? Paying down your loans and getting rid of that. And I think that more and more employers are trying to figure that out and help with repayment assistance, because now it's, like we talked about, a lot of these doctors, they've got 300 grand, but I work with couples. They both have 500.
Yeah.
So they're seven figures. And I've seen a little bit of everything, but 300 is the average, right? But there's a lot of doctors that owe significantly more than that. We're not getting to those career changers, because sometimes they've even taken out a little bit more. But I think having the employer help with that is great. It'd also be fabulous if the employer gave some type of, when they're walking you through your 401k, they're walking you through the different retirement package and the insurance things that they offer, is maybe student loans should just be part of your kind of HR onboarding as well, because it's so prevalent for early careers. So
what a great idea. And then as to George's point is, why is this geared only to certain health systems and here and there? It's because of lack of imagination by our professional association. Any entitlement program that works when everybody's involved. So we don't means test K through 12 in America. And so if someone's going to go into primary care, there should be no means testing. Doesn't matter what kind of population. You're a fundamental part of the infrastructure of that community. And because of that, you are a public service and you should be allowed. But the leaders at the associations that are in charge of this, particularly for pediatricians, lack imagination and focus and don't see the tsunami coming. The tsunami is at the current rate that we are being paid by Medicaid, there will be no pediatric access for anyone, which is the great equalizer of socialism. Nobody gets to eat, nobody gets healthcare, except the top
10 or 5% in Venezuela who have lots of cash and they can do whatever they want. And they haven't realized that this is a real problem coming.
Yeah. You know what I've seen, guys? I've seen big systems, hospital systems that take over independent, smaller practices. So now the paycheck is paid from the system to the physician. That practice that they had always been working at now is a not-for-profit organization.
Mhm.
Yet now they qualify for student loan forgiveness. It's the same building, same patients, same physicians. That's not right. Now you tell me what hospital is not for profit these days. That's all they think about is profit. It's all a scam. So Dr. Bravo, Mr. Dr. Doom and Gloom, how do you envision the future of pediatric medicine with the ongoing changes in healthcare and
In
advancement?
the US,
Yeah.
the system is unsustainable. There is not going to be a specialty of pediatrics within 5 years. And that is due to the lack of infrastructure and financial responsibility on the Medicaid program. It
Right.
is shameful that more than half of our children live at or near the poverty line that they can qualify for Medicaid. And the payment for services in Medicaid, for example, for 9 months of care, newborn care, infant care, is $350. For an obstetrician for 9 months of care and a delivery under Medicaid is $600. That is just, it's not sustainable. That's why you see obstetricians saying, I'm not going to deliver anymore because I'm paying $150,000 a year in malpractice, and to be paid $600 per patient, I can't take care of it. That's why you're seeing maternity wards closing. That's why you're seeing pediatric wards closing. That's why you're seeing private practices go out of business or people retire and nobody takes over. And the pediatric hospitals are not being able to make up the loss. We already see in New York and Northern Virginia, you cannot access a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a dentist if you have Medicaid. When that hits the wall, and now with this wonderful drug, which might drop our sick visits in the winter by 50 to 80%. How are we going to replace this revenue? How are you going to make sure that there's still maternity wards, pediatric hospitals, doctors that deliver babies, doctors that take care of babies? It's a national emergency.
Interesting. And Dr. Bravo, in your experience, medical students, and are they pursuing a career in pediatrics or are they pursuing a career in other specialties? What do you think?
The state of the medical students as we speak to them is they lack hope. Very many of them are very well-meaning and they would like to be involved in primary care and help their communities. But every step of the way, they're discouraged by their mentors in the medical school because internal medicine, pediatrics, family practice doesn't make enough money to pay your bills. You're smart, you're an orthopedic surgeon. You're smart, you're a dermatologist. You're smart, lifestyle's much better, income's much better as a cataract surgeon. You'll be able to repay your loans, you'll be able to have a nice house, you'll be able to start a family. And the people that do feel passionate and are very compassionate and still go into the field at this point are struggling, as Andrea said. Their student loans don't decrease. They're just barely paying the interest, hoping that they're married to somebody that's a little bit better off than they are so that they can pay their household bills.
Yeah. That's very
It's
sad.
affecting other parts of society, right? People now look at your student loans before they get married. No, George, it's true.
Yeah.
If I have no student loans and you have $300,000 in
I'm not dating you.
it's okay. I'm not only going to have to buy the house, but I have to be your backstop in case you can't pay that loan.
Wow.
And Dr. Bravo, can I say people will put off getting married because of their student loans? I can't tell you how common. I'm like, I'm not a marriage therapist. That's not my specialty. I'm just a student loan geek. And people will put off getting married because their partner, spouse, soon to be spouse or whatever has got a big chunk of loans. And we're putting it all off until this kind of goes away.
What's sad, Andrew, I get students coming to my office. They stay in my office full time with me and they learn. I have yet to meet the student that comes. I ask them all, so what kind of field are you going to go into? It's radiology, dermatology, surgery, or some subspecialty of something. I have yet to meet the one that says, I want to go in pediatrics. But the common thing that happens at the end of the month, they tell me all the time, and all the doctors get this statement, I didn't know pediatrics could be like this. It's a great profession. It's a great profession. We make a difference. We make everybody better. We prevent bad illnesses. But I guess by doing such a good job with the vaccination, there's less meningitis, there's less pneumonias, there's less all of these things. We shot ourselves in the foot. It's terrible. It is terrible.
I think that's just, again, it's lack of imagination. There's a lot of ways we could cut cost in anything, right? If you took my car away, we wouldn't need any taxes for roads, but then we couldn't have a job. But no one can really afford, except maybe Bill Gates, to build the roads from here to his office. The federal government has to think about these things as infrastructure. For democracy to work, there has to be educated kids. There has to be healthy young adults that are contributing to Social Security to pay for the elderly, like me. And there has to be growth. And growth comes from two places in the society. It comes from newborns and from immigration. And if we shoot ourselves in the foot and there's no way to have babies being born in America because you simply can't afford it, we're shooting our whole democracy down.
Interesting.
And Andrew is an accountant and with a master's in accounting. He understands that math. Entitlements only work as long as there's a large segment of the population that's young, growing, spending, and being taxed.
Yeah. Now, the student loan debt is out of control. Andrew, just this past year, we interviewed some physicians at a residency in our office. They were prime candidates to work in our organization. Why? Because they grew up in our office. They were seen as children in our office. Now, that's a great coming home story. They did not come to join their doctors because of their student loan. We had a better organization, but it's private. So they went down to the not-for-profit community clinic. Isn't that sad? 3 of them this year.
It's tough because when they're faced with such a large challenge to start, right? You're starting in the hole. And in a lot of cases, it's hard, but the person who's begging on the street, they don't have $300K in loan debt, and you do. And it can be disheartening that, and I know you're both aware of this, but don't we want to have more people in medicine? Don't we need more doctors?
They keep saying that there's going to be a shortage in primary care medicine, internal medicine, pediatrics, and all this kind of stuff. It's coming. It's coming. Do you know what, Dr. Bravo?
It's here.
Yesterday.
Yeah.
It came yesterday.
Yeah, we talk about this all the time. My friends can't find an internal medicine doctor, an adult endocrinologist. It's hard to come if you're trying to refer a kid for pediatric neurology. Good luck.
It's impossible. Yeah. Medicine is good, but you can't teledoc everybody.
No. But we're not getting younger, any one of us 3, right? And as you age, you do have problems, and you need a system that takes care of you. And if there's no entryway to the system, what, are we all going to wait till we have a heart attack to go ahead and get stents put in?
Wow. Well,
Andrew,
go ahead.
That's just a shortfall of imagination on how to get this done, but it needs to be done.
So how do you guys think that can the medical professionals and policymakers, how can these people work together, get along, institutions, independents, non-for-profits, federally qualified health centers, and how do we help the pediatricians with the burden of their student loans? What can we do? They come up with all these programs. I know they came up with a pediatric specialty loan forgiveness program. Do you know, Andrew? My office is qualified for that, but I yet can't give it to one of the doctors because you have to be a cardiologist, pulmonologist, rheumatologist, dermatologist, or something. We hire general pediatricians.
Yeah.
Or there's the other grant, Doctors Across New York grant, where you could qualify under a medically underserved population, but they go with the HPSA score and the MUA, which knocks everybody out, or the not-for-profit. It seems to be rigged against independence. What are your thoughts on that?
I think there's just corporate medicine, right? I think what we've seen in the dental industry already, as well as you used to just go work in a general private practice, and now it's getting bought up by a lot of corporations, and that proliferation's kind of going through medicine as well. Now, from a loan standpoint and how to think about this, I think that you have that primary loan program, and it's okay, but it can help, it can benefit. But I wish that was a little bit geared more towards some of these programs that favor larger institutions where there's no cap on how much you can get forgiven, and there's a whole lot more benefit there. So I just, like I was talking about earlier, I think there probably has to be more nuance to this, to some of these repayment assistance programs, or frankly, maybe even at the medical school level. Could there be a different price? This is coming out of my area of expertise, right?
No, you're
not a physician.
You're absolutely right.
Or if you're going into primary care versus my brother, he's in his first year as an ophthalmologist resident, it's going to be different when he gets done with training versus going into pediatrics, right? So should there be any barometer there that should help with that? Because it sets you're just set so much further behind. I think initially, if it's, you're exactly right, Dr. Rogi, where it's working as a general pediatrician, then you can't even go maybe and live in the type of environment that you want to, where you have to go to Appalachia temporarily, because that's just what you got to do to pay the bills. So
they have a HPSA score over there. That's why it's okay.
But Andrew, you're absolutely right. There needs to be a discussion on what it is fair for colleges to be charging students and held them accountable. And there needs to be an awareness that we need primary care throughout the country. That means internal medicine, family practice, pediatricians, obstetricians. It is our infrastructure. We need it. And it's probably less expensive for the government to pay these medical students loans, say medical school's 40 grand tops. That's all we're going to pay for. And if you follow through on a primary care track, we will pay $20,000 of your medical school at the federal level through your 4 years. Now your student loan for medical school is only $80,000. And there has to be the other component, which is we need to be paid well for what we do in order to keep things going. This is silliness to accrue 7% interest on a loan for 10 years or 25 years, and then the government writes it all off. Why don't we pay the right amount to begin with and provide the services to the communities? Why don't we talk about cost being a factor?
I see the students when they come to my office. Where is the medical schools? They're all online in their house. They're all pre-recorded videotapes, online testing. They don't even go to a place to do a test.
Mm-hmm.
They give them some kind of portal with some stuff to read, not even textbooks. Why do they pay so much in tuition? $65,000, because I assure you, the money that they pay their preceptors is not all that much.
My hunch on this is that I think there in academia and in government, there's lots and lots of relationships. What has happened, and this is pretty recent, where the school can set it up in a way that they can charge anything. And I think it's a little bit of a dangerous game when there's government and there's private enterprise, like at the intersection of this, because by so doing, the private enterprise, of course, what's their best interest is to maximize profits, right? But then you have the government that's coming and saying, we want to keep this affordable, but actually you can take out as much as you want. So I think that kind of gets a little bit at the crux of this. Hopefully that's not coming off political. I'm trying to be
objective. No, that's okay.
100%.
You're in the right place for that.
This is math. This is math. The problem is it's too expensive and there's return on investment. So there's only two ways to resolve it. You make it less expensive, or the ROI has to be greater. That's
I think just supply and demand, Dr. Bravo, right? If we don't have enough people in primary care, like where am I going to take my 2.5-year-old and my 4-month-old if I don't have our pediatrician? Right? Like
The emergency room.
I don't know what to do with. I mean,
Right. You'll go to the emergency room.
The emergency room.
$2,500 to see an adult ER doctor.
$3,000 where they're it sounds like what we're getting to is that we need to have some type of right. What we were talking about earlier, maybe it's the lobbying that's done, or it's just having right people that are standing up for those in primary care to do this sort of thing, because you're coming out at your debt to income. And I think this is a huge thing. It is, if you borrow 300 and you're making 150, your debt is 2 times your income. There's a lot of other professions that they are making more than they owe when they come out. And that just has a huge change in perhaps how these doctors are even practicing medicine, right? Like they're not feeling that stress of, you know what, how am I going to make ends meet with that? They're more free to practice, to be happy, to love what they do. And my experience meeting with pediatricians, they are the absolute nicest people on the planet too.
Yeah.
And
They fix everybody.
Side.
They're happy. Everybody loves their pediatrician. That's just the way it is. Now, we're getting to the top of the hour. I'm going to go some closing thoughts and ask both of you some questions. Hopefully, we could end on a positive note, Dr. Bravo. Andrew, what are your hopes for the
early
future?
to start drinking bourbon, so that would be a good note.
What are your hopes for the future, both in terms of student loan forgiveness options and the evolution of pediatric medicine? You take it first, Andrew, and then Herb.
I wanted to share a positive note first. So yesterday, a pediatrician that I worked with about a month ago, we sat down, and he'd been working as a pediatrician for 16 years. And he had just come into hearing that there's this forgiveness program. And I helped him go through the steps. And he had $200,000 discharge tax-free. And I almost started crying when he sent me that email, because that means he's got kids going to college now. And now he's going to be able to help his kids out, to get into school. And my hope is just that at some point, I don't have a job as a student loan advisor anymore, right? Like, this is my sandbox that I plan, but hopefully at some point, there's no need for this, that maybe the system is improved, or that education at schools is improved, or perhaps it is just that the repayment programs have just improved enough that this stuff's all on cruise control, because we didn't even get into the nitty-gritty nuances that people are ripping their hair out over today. But my overall hope is that ideally, if there are programs, they work, that school is still, hopefully the medical schools will continue to have more, and it'll produce fabulous doctors that want to go out and just give the best patient care. And hopefully the financial side of things will just become much, much less of a tumultuous track for them.
All right, Dr. Bravo, what are your thoughts?
Well, I have tremendous hope with our younger colleagues who are going out there, and despite these $300,000 loans, starting their own practices. They're extremely smart, compassionate, careful with their words, and they're geniuses.
Oh yeah, that's true.
I have hope that these young people will not stand and be misrepresented anymore, and they will hold hands, arms in arms, with teachers, the nurses, the parents of America, and demand that every child in America has access to a medical home.
Yeah.
It's needed.
That's
the hope.
Nice hope. And I think it can come true, maybe. So it was a fascinating dialogue here, Andrew and Dr. Bravo. Andrew, why don't you tell us if our listeners have some questions? Now, we went over some general stuff, but if they have some questions about loan forgiveness, where can they find you?
Yeah, come on over to studentloanadvice.com. We've got a blog there. We have a bunch of resources there. Or if somebody feels, you know what, I just need help. I just need somebody to do a deep dive on our situation. That's the kind of stuff that me and myself and my team of professionals do every day, helping doctors navigate this stuff. We do one-on-one consultations and 100% virtual. If you're interested, studentloanadvice.com/book.
So thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
Have a great day. Have a great day.
Thank you for listening. This has been a production of the Pediatric Lounge.
On the show notes, you will find links to our co-host and other important notes, as well as a timetable of the topics discussed today. Don't forget to follow us on social media and subscribe to wherever you listen to your podcast. Leave us a great review, as it helps us greatly. In the meantime, we will see you next week. The Pediatric Lounge. The conversations are not intended as medical advice, and the opinions expressed are solely those of the host and the guest.